Hello and welcome to another edition of Nation Building. On our program, we examine the political, social, and moral issues in the leadership of the Bahamas. And today's show is going to be an interesting one. We're talking the 2018-2019 budget. We'll talk about that with our special guest when we get back from this break.
The concierge service is the best thing ever. Like, it is so fabulous, especially for someone like me where I cannot leave my office, my job to go do anything in the middle of the day because I'm on the radio. The service was so fabulous. The ladies gave me a call, they set up an appointment, they come with their professional looking attire, they're just so cute, and they come here and it was a great experience. It took 20 minutes to switch over to the Alive service. It was simple, it was easy, and they just made me feel so welcomed. They explained everything. They hooked me up with my new phone, they gave me my data package, as you can see, hey. And it was fabulous. It was a wonderful service, but what I really liked best about it was not only did they come here and make it easy for me, but they continued to check up on me. The next day, they made sure that everything was working properly with the phone. I didn't have any issues. The following week, they contacted me again, and I've built a relationship with them. They've continued to check up on me. I feel like I'm part of the Alive family. It's amazing.
Hello, I'm Wendell Jones, and every time I sit down and I watch JCN television, I drink the Jamaica Bahama fruit juice. It's so pleasing to the palate.
I've been cooking Bahamian dishes for generations. I now use Jamaica Bahama product. The rice is very fluffy, very tasty, and good eating. Jamaica Bahama product is simply the best.
As an insurance agent, my life is go, go, go. But whenever I need a refreshing break, it's Jamaica Bahamas Island Mixed Fruit Drink. Good.
Hi, I'm Debbie Bartlett from GEMS 105.9 FM. The effect that Island Junkanoo Juice Medley has on me is exhilarating.
Welcome back to Nation Building. I'm your host, Winston Pinnock. And today on our program, I am very pleased to have, we should have had another expert, but certainly had some disappointing news and he wasn't able to show up. But we have with us someone who understands the economy of the Bahamas very well. And in the midst of this government's new budget, the 2018-2019 budget, we are talking about the economic forecast and plans that the government have for the upcoming year. And so today we're talking with Mr. DarronCash. Mr. Cash, welcome back to Nation Building.
Thank you very much, Winston. It is good to be with you.
Sure. And today as we talk, I think we'll take a departure from some of our normal antics. And this is serious business. We're talking about the future of our country and what is being presented. I know well, we can't say they're new anymore. The government, the Free National Movement, the Minister administration, presented a budget last year that they said was not truly their budget. And so this is the first budget that is being presented that represents in full the government's agenda. And so the Bahamian people for the first time have the opportunity to take a look at what the government has presented and to dissect it. Of course, this budget, in my humble opinion, is more controversial, if I could say so, than any recent budget that I've seen. Certainly, this increase in VAT is a headliner. I don't know if the government of the Bahamas, the Minister administration, understood the full import of what it was getting into, not to say whether it's bad or good, but by presenting a 60% plus increase on VAT. And so I'd like your expert thoughts for the Bahamian people to get your point of view about what's your thought, first of all, about this increase with VAT, and then just to deal with the budget in particular?
Yeah, certainly. To your first point, I think the government pretty much understood once it presented the budget, or once it had made a determination of which direction it was going to go in. I think they fairly understood that there was going to be tremendous backlash from the Bahamian people, and that certainly has been the case. Overall, my impression is that if I were to look at this from a thematic standpoint, the Minister of Finance said a lot of the right things, and to start by accentuating the positive, I think the overall theme of trying to remind the Bahamian people that it is important for us to get our national fiscal house in order is a good thing. It is an important thing. The overwhelming problem I think they face is that in trying to be all things to all people, in trying to give with one hand and take with the other hand, they risk, one, undermining their message of the importance of getting our fiscal house in order, and in so doing, the Bahamian people do not generally get a sense that this is a budget designed to compensate for a lot of past transgressions, that this is a budget that in fact is going to penalize the people who are least likely or least able to bear it. And so for that overwhelming reason of the 60% increase in VAT, the government risks losing or diminishing a lot of the advantages that will accrue in a number of the other areas where they have, for example, decreased
breadbasket items,
fees, those kinds of things.
Do you think then, you said earlier that you don't believe the government, that you do believe the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Peter Turnquest, and the government in particular, more broadly, made a calculated decision,
Yes.
of what it was doing, understood that this would not sit well?
Yes.
Wouldn't you at least credit them with being bold and brave enough to attempt to do this? This is not a popular budget or a popular approach. Mm-hmm. And whenever people have tax increases, that never sit well. So would you credit them with being bold and brave enough to advance it?
There's no question. I mean, any Minister of Finance who increases taxes significantly deserves some credit for having the cojones to do it. The reality is, so much of the communication, for example, talked about getting our fiscal house in order and compensating for some of the previous bad mistakes. The reality is that by increasing taxes at a time when let me say first, that's a good thing to do. But
you mean increasing taxes?
No, it is a good thing to try to get your fiscal house in order. Right?
Right.
The question is whether at the stage where the economy presently is, and to use the central bank's frequently repeated phrase, an anemic state, is this the best time to increase taxes? Mark me down as one of those who is of the view that this is not the best time to increase taxes. That if you are, in fact, going to work to continue a steady growth, increase in employment, if you're going to promote our tourism sector, if you're going to do things to stem the tide as far as the financial services sector, if you're going to try and grow other sectors of the economy, all of those are commendable things. And if fixing our fiscal affairs demands that sacrifices are made, even as we seek to do a lot of those other things, then the rest of the budget ought to reflect a shared sacrifice. And I am of the view that with the government continuing to borrow and continuing to spend, then it is attempting to get our fiscal house in order on the backs of the people who are least able to afford it, and least able to afford it because the economy is not sufficiently strong to absorb this, in my opinion.
But the Minister of Finance said, did he not, that it is for that very reason to not continue the borrowing why they have chosen to go the route of the significant tax increase, and with a commitment not to continue the excessive borrowings that the country has been doing for the years. And you don't accept that the tax increase will offset and disallow, as the government has pronounced. To
let's put it this way. At the end of this present fiscal year, there's projected to be $130 million shortfall on the recurrent revenue side. Right. There's a reason for that, because the projections that were factored into the budget last year didn't materialize. And my view is that to increase your revenue projections, in part because you expect you're going to collect more taxes, and in part because you believe that this slow growth will continue, to increase taxes at this particular point runs the very serious risk of actually undermining the growth that has started. And so, yes, it is smart to curtail the rate of borrowing. It is smart to curtail the rate of government spending and to attempt to do that by reducing the GFS budget deficit. The problem is it's not done enough of that in terms of fiscal discipline within government itself to justify an increase in VAT. And so that's why there's a credibility problem.
The opposition leader has made that point strongly, that there is, in his opinion, a lot more revenue to be collected that is presently not being collected, and that if that was done based on some, I don't have all the numbers here, but based on some studies that he quoted, that if the government were to pursue collecting the revenues, that it would make up for this borrowing. Now, that's opinionated as far as I'm concerned. I haven't seen the numbers to suggest that. But I hear the point, and it's well stated in many quarters, that, and it's not only just to be sure, it's not only a challenge for us here in the Bahamas. Even in the United States, that same argument has been made over the years repeatedly about this whole concept of tax increase. And we'll get to some of those examples later in the show, where we talk about the US, Jamaica, other places, and what they've done. But it seems, and I don't know if you agree with this point, that this balancing of the process, the methods rather, of on one hand having to seek to gain tax increase to provide more funding for the government, because the country is demanding, the people are demanding more services, more things to be done, and the government needs resources to do them. Balancing, on one hand, trying to gain more revenue through taxation, and on the other hand, not stagnating the growth of the economy, seems to be a very, very challenging and difficult thing. As a financial expert, what is your advice then as to how to balance this? I don't know if it's just a philosophical challenge, because both political parties and other governments elsewhere has struggled with seeking to find the right balance to this whole concept. So what is your general approach and to how this can be better achieved?
Firstly, there's, I think, almost a universal view that decreasing taxes is far more stimulative than increasing taxes. And so for me, if government does not have the latitude to decrease taxes, then at a minimum, the best approach is to not increase them. That's the first thing. Don't increase value-added tax. Second thing, the Free National Movement came to office in large measure because the Bahamian people had a palpable distaste, dislike, anger over what it regarded as an overwhelmingly large degree of improper or wasteful spending under the previous government. All of that improper or wasteful spending contributed to the level of deficits we've had in Mr. Christie's last term in office and the level of deficits that we encountered. It seems to me that, one, if you are a political organization that came to office at the height of political consciousness, where your base of support said there are some fundamental things that we believe in, integrity in office, that governments and prime ministers and ministers of finance ought to be true to the words that they speak, then in addition to making a determination not to increase value-added tax, that you ought to maintain some fidelity to the things that you railed against when you were in opposition. So the first order of business after deciding not to increase value-added tax is to aggressively look for areas where the government became bloated or where expenditures were excessive in the previous 5 years. Or if the government wishes to go further, given the track that they have been on over the last 48 or 72 hours about, the unfortunate legacy over the last 45 years, then it seems to me a good starting point is for you to begin to reduce government to meaningful levels to ensure some fiscal discipline in terms of... But
doesn't that mean letting go people from the government service and playing the risk of then being accused further by the opposition of victimization and political mischief? I mean, that has been going on for a while, that complaint, and it has persisted. And don't you think government is concerned about opposition's cry that they're putting a lot of people out of work and also slowing down the economy by not having more people employed and money circulating in the economy?
Well, I can answer that on two levels. Let me start with the most controversial one. The Minister of Education is on record on more than one occasion as speaking in a pretty disparaging manner about this culture of slackness that exists within the Bahamian workplace. If we assume for the moment that the average for-profit organization is not going to tolerate an environment where they're paying people to produce slackness or to deliver slackness, that within the private sector is going to be significantly minimal, right? Now, it suggests, therefore, that the minister may in fact be referring to the public service. So the question then becomes, where in the public service does this slackness exist? Does this lack of productivity exist? And to the degree that governments being bloated over the last whatever number of years, you pick your number, has been as a result of us hiring people and putting them on the payroll who have not been producing, then yes, to some degree, if you're going to talk about transformation, then you ought to make those kinds of hard choices about where adjustments need to be made. And then the second part of it is, in terms of the consequences of making government leaner and not meaner, to borrow Bill Clinton's phrase, it comes down to making a determination that you are in fact going to put some energy behind targeting those areas where we know, for example, there have been wasteful spending. For example, I've been a long time proponent of the view that in the main, government does not get good value for the dollars it spends on that capital budget. Now, part of it is because depending on who is in office, there is a significant level of patronage that takes place, and so a $20 million project really has a value of $10 million, and in fact, people might get less than that.
And you believe both governments, F&M and PLP, successive governments have been responsible for that kind of a practice?
Well, there's no question that both governments, PLP and F&M, have been guilty of political patronage. And this is where I take issue with the Minister of Finance and some of the others who have been speaking, because I dare say that the Bahamian people came into their political economic consciousness in 1992 when Hubert Ingram came into office.
We're going to have to break, and we pick that thought up when we come back. You're watching Nation Building. I'm your host, Winston Pinnock. We'll be right back.
I've been a customer for the past 2 years, and I will say the quality of the service is very good. During my trip to Andros, I was connected the entire trip. So that was really good. I was able to contact my family members and let them know how the trip was going. We touched land, we're here. So it was very good. And I really appreciate that. And also during times like when we had the storm, it was really good to have that service to reach out to our loved ones to make sure everyone is okay. And I really appreciate Alive for that. And even when there's a little technical difficulty, they always send out a little text message to let us know exactly what's going on. I'm happy to be alive, and I believe in best.
Hello, I'm Wendell Jones, and every time I sit down and I watch JCN television, I drink the Jamaica Bahama fruit juice. It's so pleasing to the palate.
I've been cooking Bahamian dishes for generations. I now use Jamaica Bahamas product. The rice is very fluffy, very tasty, and good eating. Jamaica Bahama product is simply the best.
As an insurance agent, my life is go, go, go. But whenever I need a refreshing break, it's Jamaica Bahamas Island Mixed Fruit Drink. Good.
Hi, I'm Debbie Bartlett from Gems 105.9 FM. The effect that Island Junkanoo Juice medley has on me is exhilarating.
Welcome back to Nation Building. I'm your host, Winston Pinnock, and we're here today talking about the new budget. And Mr. Cash, you were talking about, you've drawn reference to government's patronage and the challenges. I want you to continue your thought. We had to break.
Yeah. No, I was making the point that in 1992, when Hubert Ingram came in as Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, he began almost immediately to speak in terms of getting the country's fiscal affairs in order. And he started talking a lot about the state of our national debt, the state of the deficit. I don't think they were using GFS in that first period. But he heightened the public sensitivity to those things. Now, between 97 and 2002, when I served in the Senate and I saw 5 budgets, I will tell you that having listened to the ministers and prime ministers, and then when Mr. Bill Allen came in, presentations during budget,
he was the Minister of Finance then.
Right. Mm-hmm. It was clear that the Hubert Ingram-led governments had a far greater sensitivity to ensuring that there was less waste in the awarding of government contracts in terms of padding. And so, yes, I think all of them have been guilty of not being as aggressive in oversight and keeping projects in order. But I think the records will reflect that Mr. Christie's governments tended to be a lot less rigid in terms of their ability to curtail the level of inflated contracts and no value for dollar.
Mr. Cash, you make the point, and I think we shouldn't overlook this and gloss over it. In our country, is it really down to personalities at the helm? You talked about Mr. Ingram's administration in coming to office in 1992, how aggressive and deliberate he was about curtailing and getting rid of this patronage and the excessive padding on contracts and so forth, excessive spending, and to put the house in order. He came to government having seen what would have happened under the previous PLP, the then pending administration. He had lots of information, knowledge, understood the culture well, and set out, some would say like a bulldozer, to bring about change.
Like a pit bull.
A pit bull, and some say a bulldozer, to bring about change.
Right.
I would say with good conscience that none of our country's leader, from Sir Lyndon, Mr. Ingram, Christie, and now Dr. Minnis, I don't doubt none of these persons' desire, intention there to do what's best for the country. And so I believe it's fair to say that we're talking about approaches based on personalities and based on where things are at from where the leaders sit. I say that for this reason. I wanted to qualify what I'm going to say. Don't you accept that Dr. Minnis's and the Finance Minister, Peter Turnquest, attempt to do what they're doing in increasing taxes and all the rest of it, is based on where they sit the best thing that they see needs to be done. And it is just a matter now of the fact that Mr. Christie, in his term, his personality lended itself to being not so hands-on, not so rigid. Is that the case, or if not, tell me what you see over the years?
I think Minister Turnquest and the Prime Minister, at the end of the day, made the decision that they thought was in the best interest of the country. There's no question about that.
And to Mr. Christie's slack hand, if you will?
Yeah,
personality?
I don't think it's
Okay,
personality.
What was it?
If in fact you want to equate your willingness to, roll up your sleeves and actually be rigorous in your oversight of ministries, you mean personality. Yeah, then in that regard, Mr. Christie, I think erred significantly in the 2 terms that he was in office. But I don't think it's a matter of personality. I think it is a matter of, are you sufficiently diligent to employ the kind of rigorous oversight that a minister of all ministers needs to deploy, and whether or not you are prepared to make the kinds of sacrifices that will actually support what you're trying to do in terms of changing the mindset of the people. I'll give you an example. I remember on more than one occasion when Prime Minister Ingram, who I can't recall if he was then Minister of Finance or whether Mr. Lang or Mr. Allen were in the Minister of State chair. But in any event, what became very clear, and this happened I think shortly after the Great Recession period.
2007.
Mr. Ingram came before the country and started laying out a lot of significant adjustments that government was going to be making to start to cut back, outlining reductions in travel, putting certain hiring on freeze, cutting back on certain capital projects. Those are the kinds of things
in the 2007 to 12?
And I don't remember which period
because,
it was, but I'm saying
right.
I know it
There
happened
was a
more
period,
than once.
right.
It happened more than once. And one of those periods, in fact, actually involved reduction in salaries of members of parliament and other cabinet ministers. So I say that to say that when the Prime Minister started to announce those kinds of things, and in tandem with those began to institute some changes that the Bahamian people would feel more broadly, people got a sense of the extent to which adjustments needed to be made, because in those instances, they were shared sacrifices. Mm-hmm. Government was cutting back, members of parliaments were getting paid less, and so people knew as they were being asked to do more, or sacrifice more, or do without certain things, that the government was in fact making adjustments as well. And the point that I make in this particular budget is you don't get a sense that government is sharing in this sacrifice.
So it comes down then, if I would say so, to a matter, one, of priority. Two, I hear in all that you have articulated the need to understand the politics of it all. I guess not politics is not the right word, because people's sense of where the sacrifices are being shared, for example, is a matter of having people's confidence to feel comfortable that if we, and I've heard this personally in preparation for these some of these programs. We have the Minister of State, the Minister of the current Finance Minister, and then the opposition spokesperson that we had to interview. And so in preparation for these whole financial discussions, and I talked to a lot of people, the sense I got was, it was a mixed bag for a lot of people, but the sense I got from those who was opposed to the budget as it was presented is that they had a lack of trust of government's discipline. I don't know if you've heard that, but a lack of trust of government's discipline. One lady said to me, in fact, that she felt that the monies that government would take from her by way of these new taxes was not going to, she did not feel confident that it would actually accrue to the reduction in debt and that the lack of borrowing and so forth. And she even pointed to, in one instant, that there would be another storm inevitably, or many storms in the next 5 years. Will we hear government coming back to us and saying, well, because of this natural disaster, we had to go back and borrow again and so forth. She also pointed, and other people pointed to the Christie administration and what was done there. Whether in fact the VAT money, I think it was accounted for, but the point is people's perception is they don't trust their government. And so isn't that a major problem in what we are now facing?
It goes to the heart of a part of what I've said about what I think is the better approach. One, no increase in value-added tax at this time. One, because it has the potential to being a wet blanket on a recovery that is still very much in the embryonic stage, right? But the second part, where I was saying that I talked about earlier, goes to the heart of this trust, that the Bahamian people, in large part, looked at how Prime Minister Christie ran the government as Minister of Finance and the kinds of decisions that were made and the lack of aggressive or vigorous oversight. And it seemed to me that the second part of what the Prime Minister ought to have been doing, or ought to be doing, is to reassure its base that it actually does have the skill set, that it actually does have the discipline to reverse course from what Mr. Christie did, which is to spend recklessly, to continue to borrow, to continue to hire, and to essentially enter into long-term contracts whose value did not in any way come close to what the government was paying out. And so, yes, because at this stage, even 1 year later, the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister have not yet demonstrated to the Bahamian people that we've done everything we possibly can to instill discipline in public spending, to strengthen all the systems to account for all of the opportunities for leakages. And it is now clear that there's no other approach for us other than to increase taxes. They've not yet earned that degree of confidence.
Why do you think they haven't earned that? What is it fundamentally? Because I've heard, and I could place here any number of arguments the Minister of Finance has made to say, including, again, getting rid of the fat, to use my own colloquial term, to get rid of the fat in terms of these hirings that they accuse the former administration of hiring hundreds of people, putting them on government payroll, whether it's 3 months or 6 months. And in many cases, they've also gotten rid of retired or made redundant permanent people as well. For whatever the reasons is, government has done a significant amount of trimming in terms of the hirings, people hired. So is there another area outside of bloating government service? Is there another area that you would say that, look, they have not cut back on? Can you share?
I touched on it before, and it is this idea of a bloated bureaucracy. True or not, it is an area where the Bahamian people continue to have questions. So the question then is, in that area, what has the government done specifically? We know what has happened with a number of people in the Ministry of Education. We don't know the extent to which that has been broadly spread across, or that those kinds of issues have been addressed across the public sector, right? As far as contracting, in terms of the buildings that have been built, whether they've come in on time, whether they've come in under budget, whether they have actually been utilized in the manner in which they have been intended to do. Those are just off the top some of the big ticket things where public funds are being spent, and the government ought to be able to say to the Bahamian people, here's what has been done in these specific areas, and here's what the total represents in terms of the overall budget picture. what the Minister of Finance has said is, yes, listen, we're going to do all of those things. We're going to improve our systems, our structures. But for now, we have to increase taxes.
Okay, so we're going to get specific with a lot of what the government has proposed and so what they said the benefit to the Bahamian people will be when we get back from this break. You're watching Nation Building. I'm your host, Winston Pinnock, and we'll be right back after this break.
The concierge service is the best thing ever. Like, it is so fabulous, especially for someone like me where I cannot leave my office, my job to go do anything in the middle of the day because I'm on the radio. The service was so fabulous. The ladies gave me a call. They set up an appointment. They come with their professional looking attire. They're just so cute. And they come here and it was a great experience. It took 20 minutes to switch over to the Alive service. It was simple. It was easy. And they just made me feel so welcomed. They explained everything. They hooked me up with my new phone. They gave me my data package. As you can see, hey. And it was fabulous. It was a wonderful service, but what I really liked best about it was not only did they come here and make it easy for me, but they continued to check up on me. The next day, they made sure that everything was working properly with the phone. I didn't have any issues. The following week, they contacted me again, and I've built a relationship with them. They've continued to check up on me. I feel like I'm part of the Alive family. It's amazing.
Who said you can't get great quality products at an affordable price? If you want the best quality food products at the most affordable prices, you must pick up the Jamaica Bahama brand of fine quality products at your favorite food store. Products like Jamaica Bahama Coconut Water, the most healthy and refreshing drink on the market. Jamaica Bahama Fruit Punch, the only fruit punch in the Bahamas made from real fruit. Jamaica Bahama coconut milk, green pigeon peas with coconut milk, condensed milk, kidney beans with coconut milk, corned beef, green pigeon peas, mackerel, and corn. Jamaica Bahama's fine line of products is available at all your favorite food stores and convenience stores nationwide. Telephone 351-8282 in Freeport and 341-4091 in Nassau. I don't wanna win. No, no, I don't wanna win.
Welcome back to Nation Building. I'm your host, Winston Pinnock, and we are here today talking about the 2018-2019 budget. And I don't know a person in the country, Mr. Cash, who is not have some idea or some contribution as you move about and talk to people about the budget this year, even if it's the fact that they don't want to pay new taxes.
Right.
Let's start this segment off, and we have a lot to cover here. One of the major part of this whole tax ordeal is the government's decision to increase taxes on the don't want to use the term number houses anymore. That's what they used to be called back in the day. They're legal entities today on the web shop.
Yes.
And the government says that it will on a scale, it will go as high as 50% in taxing the web shop operations in the country. And I must say, again, I do my little own survey here, not scientific, but it seems to me that if they are not gaining traction or have a good wicket on any part of this whole tax increase, that is the one area that they seem to have the majority of public support. What say you?
I think that, well, that may be the case. I've not surveyed as broadly, but it is clear that the web shop owners have established their presence in the community. They are making a difference in a number of areas, and outside of just the hiring and providing an area for recreation. And so, in that regard, to the extent that seeking to get more taxes from that source of funding keeps the VAT at 12%, as opposed to taking it up to 15%. I think the average man is appreciative of that. But specifically to whether that's a good decision or not, I can't say for certain. I'll only say what I said in another forum, that the question of parity or equality, I think, comes into play, and that's something that the government, from a legal standpoint, will have to satisfy itself on, that it is appropriate to tax them in the way in which they are doing it.
Before we move on, though, just quickly, because we're going to jump away, the government, one of its strongest argument is that the web shops have been operating for the past 4 years. Prior to that, and they've only been paying taxes for the last 4 years since it became a legal entity,
right.
And that the government makes, or the Minister of Finance makes the argument that, you know, they've made gazillions of money, right. Of endless monies in over the years it was operating illegally, right. And I guess his bottom line is that this is simply an attempt to get them to pay their fair share. That's the government's argument. The only question I would ask is, do you think, not the right or wrong in it, it's a matter of, do you think that is a smart approach?
Well, you know, let's put it this way. You will be familiar with the question posed to the famous American outlaw, and it was question posed to him, why do you rob banks? And of course his answer was, because that's where the money is. And the downside of public disclosure, as the number of the web shops did at a time when they were seeking to be legalized and regulated, was to present financial information to the government. And so the government obviously has some intimate knowledge about what kind of revenues are generated, and they have perhaps some meaningful indication of what their profits are at the end of the day. And so because that information may not be in the public domain, it is within the domain of the Bahamas government. Government has a pretty good sense of what the market is able to bear. Now, whether or not at the end of the day it passes legal muster is another question.
So just to close out on that, just for public knowledge, I just wanted to say the lowest rate that they have is 20%, and that scales up all the way to 50%. Government projection is that the on average, a number of houses making $20 million will pay $4 million in taxes. Those making 115 million will pay 37 million. And the argument at the end of the day is that the comparison, the scale which they've used they've done their research, and they find it reasonable. There's a matter in court apparently now, or going to court, where the numbers, the gaming operators as a group is challenging the government on this position, and so we'll see where that goes from there. But
I would have thought going to court was the first step, because I generally didn't see, other than a PR advantage, any advantage in sending the minister a letter, other than, I guess, to say, well, out of courtesy, we're coming to you first.
Well, it's been a battle, a campaign from both sides, actually. Yeah. A social media campaign from the government making the case, and the gaming operators have been running the media circuits for weeks. So yeah, we'll leave that and we'll see where that goes from here. Moving on, though, talking about the government's give back to the country, as they put it, they make the argument that the giveaways in the budget ranges from the breadbasket items where VAT has been removed to electricity. The most recent adjustment that was made was to move the threshold for electricity bills from $100 to $200, and ensuring that a significant, they say just under 70,000 consumers will benefit from that. And so clearly, that was not the initial proposal, but you can see that the government is seeking to make some adjustment to stay in line with, and I guess, ensuring that public view support is with them in their effort to make the case that what they're doing is fair and balanced in giving back with one hand and taking with one hand and giving somebody else.
Let me clarify. There are no giveaways. I mean, someone's going to pay for it, and obviously the people, you and me, who are most able to, are going to bear the cost. I think, I don't know what the analysis was on the $100 and what an additional analysis was there to accommodate the increase to $200, but in any event, that kind of service to the poor, service to those who are disadvantaged, That's the kind of things that I think Bahamians in general don't have a problem making sacrifices for. Now, because it is a stark change from what went before, with people on a special list or people who were well connected just never got their services disrupted, or because they were in a special place, people paying little attention to consumption levels. But in any event, I think Bahamians generally don't mind sacrificing so that those who really deserve a break, whether it's on BEC or BTC or anything else, or water and sewage, can get a break. So that's a good thing that the government is doing. There's no question about that. Doing, and you may get to them, but some of the additional things in terms of reducing customs duties on basic items like clothing, very positive. Again, it's not a giveaway because those who are able to are going to be paying for it. Making the effort to reduce taxes on breadbasket items. On the one hand, obviously, there's an expectation that people will see the benefits in the food store. You know, what from my vantage point, I don't believe Bahamians have a general sense that as government has done those kinds of things in the past, they've actually seen a commensurate level of decreases in prices.
It has not happened.
In the stores.
It hasn't happened.
Right, exactly. And so when you're doing those kinds of things, people are very, very skeptical because of the historical experience of not seeing it. But going from 7.5 to 12 is something that hits everybody,
right
and
away.
People can feel it. And so, again, I say, in the effort to give on one hand, it's taking on another, but people feel more than anything the increase in the taxation. But no question, there are some good things in there that the government is seeking to do.
The government, one of the arguments that the government makes is that, and I've heard the minister present some comparison to what's happening in the Caribbean, for example, is that the government tax revenue is roughly around 20% in the Caribbean and the region, and we are nowhere near that. And on one hand, you can see that in order to not just to come in line because you want to come in line with them, but in order to manage the economy well and to not continue the path we've gone on, that it's just reasonable that we, not only will we have this tax increase now, but obviously it is something that is going to continue. How soon, I don't know, but the point is that they make the point that, look, we're still way below where the average Caribbean country
Again,
is.
Mr. Pinnock, I'm going to come back to where I was before. When I was in the Senate, I used to hear that argument, and it never impressed me. Just because in the Caribbean, countries are collecting 20%, or they have value-added taxes in the case of Barbados, plus income taxes, or they do this, that, or the other in Jamaica, never impressed me. Because all politics and all of the things we do in terms of our lives are local things. And so, to where I was before, the benchmark is always going to be whether, as a populace, we're satisfied that we're getting value for dollars. And I'm in that camp that says, I'm not satisfied that we've been getting value for dollar. And so, increasing the rate to get up to 20% of GDP going into the government is not something in my mind that ought to be pursued if government has not demonstrated the ability to spend our money wisely. And a problem that Prime Minister Minnis faces is that almost from day one, they started awarding no-bid contracts, doing exactly what the PLP was castigated for. So when you start to do those kinds of things, when you start to parcel out, you have this set of contracts, you have this set of contracts, and do those kinds of things.
Have the government given reasonable justification as to why it had to do that?
Not to my mind. Not to my mind. But again, you know, there's got to be an overall pattern of behavior that inspires confidence, that you're conducting yourself in a way that gives people confidence that whether it's 20% or 25%, the tax dollars are being spent wisely.
Let's look at what happened in the United States repeatedly, but going back to the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. The 1970s in the U.S. was a period that I think those who are old enough to remember will still remember that depressive period. I think part of it, the latter part of it, when Jimmy Carter was president, remember the gas lines and the scarcity of gas, and America was at a low point. And we're talking about economics, we're talking about a depressed economy. We're growing out of that slowly. I think IMF projects this year that there'll be a 2.5% growth, and I guess any growth is good. You want to grow more. You need a higher growth rate in order to really get the economy really moving, but at least it's better than point something or 1%. So looking back at that period, the Reagan philosophy was that, look, drastically reducing taxes, it was done over a period in a scaled way, reverse of what we're doing. Well, we're not scaling up, we're just jumping there. But it was a scale reduction. What he projected that it would do was to cause people to incentivize people, because the argument was made that people were on overtime and excessive income that they were making. They were paying up to as high as 80% on the additional income. And so people simply decided that they wouldn't work extra, and companies, their profits, there was no incentive to go for more, to make more money. And so that philosophy bucked head with the fact that Reagan said, if you give the people back the money, they would spend the money, businesses would grow, and there would be a spin-off effect that would just drive the economy upwards. Yeah, obviously, it's not as simplified as only giving a tax break. There were other things that had to be done to right-side that. But the result was that an economic boom resulted in the 1980s that was significant, at that point unprecedented. The Bill Clinton era produced a great growth as well. But at that point, turning around from a depressed economy to a significant and great boom, the Reagan model certainly, many would argue, proved that this concept of tax reduction can work if properly instituted. And I wonder out loud if our leaders have looked carefully at that model, and what in your mind then would mitigate against that approach. In other words, you have the idea, reduce taxes, give people back the money, they would spend more, the businesses would expand and create more jobs. And the government actually, strangely, in the 1980s, collected more revenues. I found that interesting, that they collected more revenue with a much less tax rate. It went down to in the 30s from a high of 70-something. What's your view on that?
I obviously wasn't old enough to experience it, but I certainly read through in my studies of economics the years of stagflation, stagnant economy, and high levels of inflation under Jimmy Carter. And you're right that a part of Reagan's revolution involved reduction in taxes. The reduction in taxes ought to be at a level where they are reduced for the people who are, in fact, going to spend the money to generate the kind of volume of funds in the economy. And that is where I come off that the best approach in an economy such as ours, where the overwhelming majority of people, if they have an extra $100 in their pocket, are likely to spend it, not waste it, but they're going to spend it on critical essentials that they need. And so, to my mind, it is best left in the pockets of the Bahamian people as opposed to government, as opposed to putting it in the government's hands. Because again, I come back to this new government has to demonstrate its bona fides in terms of being able to be good stewards of the economy. From day one, it was borrowing. Yes, borrowing to pay off Mr. Christie's bills, borrowing to do things that they thought were essential. But if you're talking about painful sacrifices, the government is to choose. And by seeking to increase value-added tax, at the same time you're reducing tariff in some ways, in my view, is not to choose. You're trying to have it both ways. And so the most painful piece will be the increase in value-added tax. But the other parts, I think, are going to get
quickly,
lost.
as we wrap up the program, what is your projection then? that next year this time we'll have another budget would have been presented. Do you think, two questions, do you think government will gain the revenue it's projecting to get? And secondly, the net effect of this tax increase?
I'm hopeful that the government gets the revenues it
for the country's
projects.
sake?
For the country's sake, because, well, firstly, for the government's sake, I do want the government to succeed. And yes, for the country's sake, because to the extent that government succeeds and is able to make a difference in communities in terms of some of the discretionary spending, most of us are going to be better off. The concern I have is, I go back to a point made earlier, $130 million off of what was projected in the current fiscal period at a time when your economy is growing without an extra burden of value-added tax. I suspect that increasing value-added tax to the extent that they have is going to have a negative effect on that level of growth, because the shortcoming in the budget is some real clear-eyed sense of what the government's going to do to really promote growth in the economy. That part, I think, got lost amidst over 100 pages of talking about deficit spending or the need to reduce the deficits. And so I hope that they hit the numbers. Last year or the current year was not a great indication, but if this wet blanket comes down as it appears to be coming, I think they're going to have a tough time. And it's clear the government's not quite prepared to make the kinds of adjustments on the spending side that they need to be making. And
you believe that at the end of next year, the net effect of this will be what? Just from where you sit.
I think instead of the 2.5% with an increase in value-added tax, you might see 0.5% or 1%, if that in
low?
terms of
Wow.
in terms of growth.
Let's hope for the country's sake, Mr. Cash, that you're wrong. Thank you so much for coming on our program again and sharing your thoughts with us. And of course, this is an area that you are a CPA, and you've spent your life in finance, and so I'm sure that our country is better informed as best as we can present information to you in a very balanced way. On behalf of the crew at Nation Building, we'd like to thank you this week for watching our program, and stay tuned as always, and have a great week.
The concierge service is the best thing ever. Like, it is so fabulous, especially for someone like me where I cannot leave my office, my job, to go do anything in the middle of the day because I'm on the radio. The service was so fabulous. The ladies gave me a call. They set up an appointment. They come with their professional looking attire. They're just so cute. And they come here, and it was a great experience. It took 20 minutes to switch over to the Alive service. It was simple. It was easy. And they just made me feel so welcomed. They explained everything. They hooked me up with my new phone. They gave me my data package. As you can see, hey. And it was fabulous. It was a wonderful service, but what I really liked best about it was not only did they come here and make it easy for me, but they continued to check up on me. The next day, they made sure that everything was working properly with the phone. I didn't have any issues. The following week, they contacted me again, and I've built a relationship with them. They've continued to check up on me. I feel like I'm part of the Alive family. It's amazing.
Hello.
Did you get it?
Yes, baby. I got it.
Don't come home without it.
These arms of mine, they are yearning for wanting you.
Where is it?
Strongback is distributed by Jamaica Bahamas Import and is available at your favorite food or convenience store nationwide. For more information, call 341-4091 in Nassau and 351-8282 in Freeport.